Oh, it is noon, so I am going to begin the recording. Hello and welcome to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are currently exploring E.M. Forster's 1908 novel, A Room with a View. Today is our last discussion where we will discuss the novel as a whole. Um, my name is Anna Traylor. I am the education specialist at Eudora Welty House and Garden. We are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer, and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College for guiding these discussions, alongside our guest instructor for the series, Kelly Marsh, who is not with us here today. Just some housekeeping before we get started. To comment or ask a question, please click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you may tap or hold the screen for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at that chat box every now and then. Okay, Suzanne, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Well, thanks to Kelly Marsh, we all know a great deal more about E.M. Forster and about A Room with a View than we did 6 weeks ago. But we're going to venture out on our own today and see what we think of the novel. I want to structure our discussion in 2 parts, focused around my biblical text, Eudora Welty, the Bible as according to Welty. And I want to start with a reference to this book, which is called A Writer's Eye, Collected Book Reviews, because Eudora Welty reviewed Forster's late story collection, which was titled The Life to Come and Other Stories, and was published in 1973. And it included the short fictional homosexual stories that he wrote, but had been unable to publish in his lifetime. So I want to start with that. And I also wanted to note that this is an example of Eudora Welty was my best teacher of fiction, as my best instructor as a reader. And some of the things she says here are some of the things that she and I talked about when we talked about fiction more generally, not about E.M. Forster, but just about fiction. But here's from her review of Forster's The Life to Come and Other Stories. It will be sad. By the way, this was a very positive review. She liked the stories. She had some reservations about them, but she welcomed them and was glad to see them in print. But then she said this: it will be sad if the aspect of homosexuality, which kept Forster's stories from reaching print in his own day, turns out to be their only focus of interest for today's readers. It will be sadder if it reanimates the reevaluators, who, upon the debut of Maurice, a novel then aged 57, wanted to go at the whole of Forster's work on the basis of news freshly received by them concerning his private life. Have we been as ready for Forster's honesty as we thought we were? Forster, whose greatness surely had its root in his capacity to treat all human relationships seriously and truthfully, has Clive in that novel is Maurice, has Clive in that novel speak of homosexual love as a passion we can direct, like any other, to good or bad. And of course, the best realized of the homosexual stories dovetail perfectly into the best of all his work. Even the earliest and most ephemeral of them will be recognized as the frailer embodiments of the same passionate convictions that made for the moral iron in his novels. So here is Welty saying that we should embrace the stories, but we should not limit their interpretations to the biographical one. And my own conversations with her and in her correspondence with William Maxwell, she always stressed to me the power of the imagination to transform biographical details so that they could serve larger purposes in the story or novel. For instance, in A Curtain of Green, I once asked her, is this a story about your mother's grief at the death of your father? And she said to me, I hope my mother never realized that. But she also, it was a biographical story, but it was more than biographical. It wasn't just about her own mother, and the interpretations were not limited to that. So I'm really grateful that we can now read A Room with a View with the insights that the biographical revelations have brought to us. But I hope we don't limit ourselves to only the biographical as we interpret the story. So having said that, let me ask about Lucy. Is it possible for us to look at Lucy as a young woman as well as a disguised young man? Is her reluctance to accept George understandable if we see her as female? Is her alienation from her family believable if we see her as female? And do y'all have any specific textual support for those? So those are my two questions for us to start with. Is Lucy believable as a woman? Or are we to see her just as a veiled young man? And what about her alienation from her family? Is that believable? And what is the nature of that alienation in the novel? Anybody want to help me out, start us off here? Yeah, Bill, go.
Well, I think she's very believable as a young woman, and I think the alienation from her family, especially her mother, um, struck me as very realistic in the sense that her mother might have been much like mine, and that she didn't want any of her children marrying outside of her church. She really was very uh, strong about that, and unfortunately for her, the first four of her children did exactly that. So it created some alienation for a bit, and I could see, the mother here, uh, whatever her beliefs were, she knew that Emerson didn't share those beliefs, and not only that, his father didn't share those beliefs. And so that to me seemed very realistic. I didn't look at that as any kind of code for, anything else. It was a surprise to me that people actually saw that. But now, if I look at her as a young man, and it's just looking at her as a young man who's unsure, let's say, about her sexuality, right? His sexuality. I don't know whatever the pronoun's supposed to be, but how do you look at the rest of the characters then? What's their gender, and how did they see this relationship developing all along? Uh, what's Cecil? Is that his name? I can't remember. But yeah, what's his sexuality? So it throws everything into a complete topsy turvy. Not that that's any big deal on anybody else's problem other than mine, but I have trouble seeing this working out in that way in a small town setting in turn of the century England as being anything other than this.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just
I don't think the biographical readers want us to turn it into a sort of one by one sort of instance, but to see the kind of stresses and strains. But I think you're right. Like the mother, her political beliefs are so different, or her social beliefs so different from the Emersons. There would be a reluctance, certainly there, and I think. Well, I'll stop and let's see what John has to say. Susan, Harriet, and Pearl. Good. John, go.
I agree with Bill that I think it's just, I'm not going to go into why I agree with Bill about what he said. Let me say, I was rereading some of this last night, looking for something very particular. And it was a lot of fun to read. Again, to go back and read, and to me, it is it's a great satire about life in England at that time. I think I said this, several weeks ago. I first read this as a coming of age book for Lucy, and then after going through it, I think it's a coming of age for George as well. But they approach life and from two different perspectives, and in the course of finding that out, they find out that they're in love with each other. And I thought one of the most biggest reveals that I just had not realized until Kelly talked about it last week. Absolutely nobody at the start of this book, nobody's married.
Yeah.
And at the end of the book, there's only one couple married. And I don't know what that means. I do think, I wonder if the book is almost I think the book's very positive, even with all that. And I think part of it has to, you can approach it theologically, that it's positive. You can approach Mr. Emerson, that there's the everlasting why, and responded to with a yes. And there's so many books that come after this that are, including like Ulysses by James Joyce. He said the most positive words in the English language were yes, and he ends Ulysses with what's his name, Leopold.
Molly.
Yeah, and Molly saying yes, yes, yes. I think 3 times, it may be 5 times. And he said, and I mean, that's a reaffirmation of their relationship at the end of that book. And that's only covers 24 hours of a day. And anyway, I almost wonder if the book's not an allegory because of the names of the people. You can, nearly all of these names, Vice, Cecil's name being Vice.
John, let me interrupt you, because I'm going to come back to that in the second part of our discussion, because I want to talk about the social, but let's go on to Susan.
Okay.
Yeah, I've missed the last couple of sessions, so I don't know if you've already, or what you said, but it never really occurred to me to think of Lucy as a young man. And I was reading her really through, even though it's a little later, what Virginia Woolf talks about in A Room of One's Own and Professions for Women, about the way the novelist, especially the woman novelist, can't write the body, can't say anything about the body, and the kind of predominance of the Victorian angel in the house myth, that women are always having to struggle against, and I mean, it seems that so much of the time Lucy is trying to break free of that, but then she's also afraid to break free of those things. So I really kind of saw a kind of consonance between Forster and Woolf in this. And for that reason, I think I definitely read her as a young woman, young lady, young girl, whatever.
I mean, I totally agree with you. I think that sort of the Edwardian inability to bring young women, to educate young women about sexual matters, the inability of mothers and daughters to talk about sex together, and the kind of mystery that's posed for Lucy, that coming to terms with her own attraction to George seems to be part of that. Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any way to read the novel.
Let me just say one more thing, and that is there's no discussion between Lucy and her mother about sex in the novel. That's absent. There's talk about somebody being appropriate person to marry. There's talk about marriage, but not about sex. Okay, Harriet, you go.
Well, yeah, okay. I was going to say that I don't think there's a way to read the novel without thinking of Lucy as a woman. She's a woman in the novel. And do I think it's informing to also know that in the background there are issues for the writer that are about sexual preference and marriage? That's informing, but doesn't change my sense that I'm reading a relationship between a young woman and the world. I think that the mother is a really interesting character. They don't talk about sex, but they do talk about the women's movement. I'm thinking back to that passage when she says that she might go up to London. Lucy tells her mother she might go up to London and have a flat there. And she comes into her money next year. And her mother responds with her a mess of typewriters and latchkeys and agitate and scream and be carried off by the police. There's a generational difference. There is more than that. The mother is presented as a threat throughout the book. I mean, almost from the very beginning, Charlotte presents her as your mother would never forgive me. She wouldn't like it. Her mother is the arbiter of behaviors, and we're as the socializer. A mother as socializer. We're looking at whether Lucy knows how to behave. I spent some time this week starting Wendy Moffat's biography, A Great Unrecorded Life. A Great Unrecorded History, which does very much present Forster as writing almost exclusively about his sexual preference. But there are interesting stories about the mother and son that is Mrs. Honeychurch. His mother was a single mom who had lost her husband. She and Ian Forster lived together for all of her life. She is presented as the arbiter of rules. There are stories about his talking to his dolls about whether they've learned the rules. And there is a sense of her as the presenter of a Christian point of view, which I think Forster is increasingly in antagonism to in the novel, as he is, presenting the idea of a holiness of the body rather than Christianity. But the idea that this mom is there was something else I was going to say. I don't know. I'll stop there. I'll stop.
I'm gonna step in defense of Mrs. Honeychurch. I think she is more conservative than Lucy. But I think Lucy is also still part of her mother at the end, where you pointed out she's darning the sock. Lucy wants freedom, but she hasn't fully embraced it. She's still part of convention. The mother, I think, is not nearly as negative as you're suggesting. She's thrilled that she dumps Vice, that Lucy dumps Vice, that Lucy sometimes interprets her mother as being more opposed than she is. Although go ahead. You're muted, Harriet.
No, am I? I don't think so. The other thing I was going to say was that Forster throughout his life never told his mother about his sexual preference. He never came out to her, and he was always guarding against her knowing. I think the negative feeling that you're getting for me is not for Mrs. Honeychurch, but rather in this mother-son relationship, which is not negative. It's they have a partnership. They live together. She enables him in certain ways to be the writer that he is. But there is also a difference of point of view and a sense of a kind of the threat of the mother's judgment is lingers, whether it's realistic or not, whether it's imposed by the child, but it's there.
Pearl.
I think we've been pretty much convinced that Forster is using the narrator for part of his voice and his perceptions of things. And I don't see Lucy as a male figure, but I think I like thinking about Forster thinking himself into Lucy, not as somebody who is gay, but as someone who doesn't know who she is or how to behave or how she'll be accepted or how she'll live the rest of her life. And in that sense, I think the whole gay question is lovely to think about, because it gives Forster the opportunity to say, hey, it's not only me, it's not only my men friends, but it's women who are being told how to live their lives also. For example, I go to my text because Suzanne, you asked for textual evidence.
I'm thrilled that you're doing it. Yes. Good.
But she says in the Lying to Mr. Emerson chapter, she disliked confidences, for they might lead to self-knowledge and to that king of terrors, light. So she, as we've said, is on the cusp of self-knowledge, and she keeps pulling back from it. Wait, if I have self-knowledge, then I'm responsible for my decisions. I'm responsible for what I'm supposed to do, how I live my life. And then just a little later in that chapter, when they're talking about whether or not George was baptized and so whether this would be appropriate, she says, I don't know, gasped Lucy. I don't understand this sort of thing. I was not meant to understand it. And then to the idea about what happens at the end. I mean, you all know I'm a great romantic, so I like that they got together. But at the same time, when she recognizes that Cecil has been telling her how to behave, she actually accepts how George has told her she is behaving. So I don't see her as making as much progress as Edna Pontellier, for example, or the other women authors, characters that were mentioned last week. And I think at the very end, if there's a disassociation with the family, I'm trying to sort of think about that. I read the ending 2 or 3 weeks ago, so I'm not sure about this, but couldn't Lucy be rejecting her family because her family was among those trying to tell her how to behave? And so now she's stuck with George. She made her choice and she's trying to figure it out. So that's all.
I'm with you, Pearl. I think almost all of us are, that the two interpretations do dovetail and they inform each other, and one doesn't negate the other. The biographical and the more traditional interpretations can coexist. And about the mother, I would say too, about the alienation from the family. Lucy is there reading a letter from Freddie. She's not cut off from communication with her family, and her mother has opposed her actions before and come around, and Lucy has overestimated her mother's opposition before. So I really think that, to me, that's something that's not, it's not something that need possibly endure. We don't know, but not need to. Liz. And then
thanks.
Al.
I appreciated that last comment. I just wanted to say, like, to see her as a representation of the gay experience, I don't think we need to take that super literally and say, well, then she's not a woman and this whole novel can only be understood that way. I think both interpretations can be true at the same time. And I really appreciate it. I hadn't been introduced to that idea before in my reading of this novel, that he's using his experience as a closeted gay man to say something. And I see it as he's using his life experience to show us an aspect of relationships that maybe haven't been shown in other novels. And I maybe the analogy is like, if you say we're an orphan and you're writing the story of somebody who is a child of divorce, it's not the same thing, but maybe you can use some of your own life experience of feeling abandoned in order to shine light on this character's experience. So I see it as sort of analogous of that. But I very much appreciated that reading, because I think it makes my understanding of the characters richer.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I think so too. I mean, a writer has to write out of his or her own experience, and you draw on that experience, and then you imagine yourself as a writer into lives, as Eudora Welty said, not your own, and your understanding of those lives not your own are enriched by your own experience. Okay, Alec.
Am I the only one that sees the mother as kind of a closeted progressive? All these little irreverent comments that she throws in from time to time, and that Lucy really is just sort of becoming the person that the mother would like to be, but hadn't got the guts and courage that Lucy does. One little thing there. And so while I'm at it, am I the only one that sees the novel as a novel of purpose? And his purpose is a analysis and a takedown of the Edwardian value structure, I guess.
No, you're not. And now I want to
Okay.
come to that, Alec. That's my next thing. But let's finish with this, and then
Okay.
let's turn to Alec's question, because I think that's the next thing we need to talk about. Harriet, did you have something else?
I
And then
did. I just wanted to pick up on the idea of Lucy's journey of understanding, and this connects to Alex's comment as well. And Alex, I agree with you about the mom as being a kind of someone who is ready to be different than her daughter thinks she is. But I also but I wanted to go back to the line in the novel where we are asked by the narrator, why does anyone tell anything? The question is eternal. And I'm just thinking about telling as a way to understand. I read some survey online recently about reading, and it offered all these choices about why you read: comfort or escape. It didn't say to understand. I think you read to understand. And I think that an interesting thing about the end of this book is that we're left with a whole rack of characters who we have not been so positive about, seeing them on their journey to understanding themselves. I'm thinking of Charlotte and Miss Lavish and Cecil. It's not just Lucy that is on this journey to understand herself, but the characters in general are making progress in that way.
except for Mr. Beebe, perhaps. We can talk about that later.
Well, I think he is. I think that when he says, I'm glad you told me this, I'm glad for your insight, that I appreciate your insight. I think he is.
What about when he says, I'm not interested in you anymore? That's his last statement. Anyway, go, Laura.
Oh, Mr. Beebe. I thought I thought I heard Mr. Beebe. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Laura, and then John.
I was just thinking also, we spent a lot of time talking about the chapter titles, and I was left confused with this idea of the separation with the mother, because I guess I just didn't feel like, I mean, there was a chapter that says lying to Mrs. Honeychurch as well, but she's sort of tucked in there, surrounded by Mr. Beebe and Freddie and the servants. And we spent a lot more time seeing her lying to everyone than with her mother, but yet that feeling, I was left with the question at the end about exactly why that break with her mother. And it seems to me the only thing I can think of is this lying that she was doing. But at the same time, in this process of the journey that we're talking about, no one is helping her with the muddle. She's in this muddle. She's trying to get out of the Middle Ages, the end of the Middle Ages, but nobody's really helping her through that muddle. And I guess I don't find it, I find it surprising that somebody would be upset with her for being confused and for struggling and for trying to figure these things out when they're not really helping her.
Well, she has married in a hurry. I mean, 6 months later,
Yeah.
and she's married someone who's from a family whose social views are very different from her own. So, I mean, I think there could be some resentment there, or some I don't know, strong disagreement without it being totally alienating. But John.
I want to go back to the, I guess, the issue of homosexuality and the love that dares not speak its name. And I think it would have been, and I think you alluded to this, but it would have been incredibly dangerous to have written a book, for Forster to have written a book to suggest that anybody is homosexual. And I'm just, we're maybe 20 years before, Oscar Wilde files a suit for libel against the father of his lover, and he loses that libel suit, and then he's prosecuted for being a homosexual, and he goes to prison for being a homosexual. And that's the world that Forster is growing up in. And after Wilde leaves prison, he never returns to England or Ireland. He goes to France, and he goes to Italy. And it would be extremely important to me. I'm not to me. It seems to me it would be extremely important to Forster that there be nothing in the book that suggests that he's affirming that kind of lifestyle.
I think that's right. He did write about it, but he just never published it. He kept it. He wrote a lot. He kept it. Let me give another quotation from Eudora Welty, and let's think about this. This is from her essay, Must the Novelist Crusade, focused on the civil rights movement, but she says this about Forster. A Passage to India is an old novel now. It is an intensely moral novel. It deals with race prejudice. Mr. Forster, not by preaching at us while being passionately concerned, makes us know his points unforgettably as often as we read it. And does he not bring in the dark? The points are good 40 years after their day because of the splendor of the novel. What a lesser novelist harangues would have buried by now, his imagination still reveals. Revelation of even the strongest forces is delicate work. And so here's what both John and Alec are pointing us toward. What are the social issues that the novel addresses in a delicate fashion, or complex fashion? Anybody want to talk about any of them? And Laura and Liz, are your hands up for this, or are they? Okay. Laura, yours up? Okay, not Laura. Anybody? Alec, you want to start us off here? You were saying you thought it was a satire.
Did I say that?
I thought you did. Something along those lines.
I'm just thinking of the authorial intrusions. I see them that way. I guess you'd say the narrator's intrusions, just in case we don't get it from the actual events in the novel. It seems that the narrator intrudes with a bunch of philosophical comments here and there that are pretty directly aimed like an arrow at Victorian Edwardian values and stuff like that. That was my only thing.
So let's think about that. Arrows aimed at Edwardian values. Harriet? And then I want to come back to John, who was on this, and I stopped him earlier. Yeah.
So I just wanted to add the topic of class to things I think he is addressing. And, I think that we start out with a kind of the comedy of the improper London accent at the Bertolini, and we move to a notion that there are people who don't have bad manners; they have no manners. People who are not socialized into a class outlook or mode of behavior. And I was trying to find, and haven't yet, in my notes, the moments when class is being discussed between Vice and Lucy, and when Vice says, I think there should be intermarriage, and Lucy says it, and you don't believe that for a minute, but I just think that a persistent issue and a very complicated one in Forster's work is the issue of class.
Yeah, let's talk about social class, because I think that's very important throughout the novel. So we have the Vices, whose class is different from the Honeychurches. We have the Cockney landlady at the Bertolini. We have the Emersons. What kind of comments is Forster offering us on this notion of the importance of class in the British social world? Pearl.
I would just add to your list there that the Emersons represent the Americans, and the Americans are a class in and of themselves to the Edwardians.
I like that idea. Their name certainly evokes America and their attitudes. Yeah. Any sort of commentary on class here? Go ahead, Jim.
There is a discussion of class, and again, I think it's satirical, almost allegorical, and and by that I mean it doesn't have any. This book is devoid of things like I don't think entail is mentioned, and how the concept of entail can affect somebody's life, and the science, anything that's scientific. I think the only allusion to anything science is there's a reference to Cecil teaches Lucy about Freud in an afternoon, and that's the only thing. And what the world is just about to change and be turned upside down with Einstein and the theory of relativity and special relativity and general relativity. And it's going to have such an impact on literature and art and all the things that are discussed in the book. And it's just, to me, like the book is almost nearly everybody who's got a name in the book, it's the opposite. It either describes their character and it generally doesn't come out in a good way. And I'm thinking about Vice and Eager, who is just one of the most detestable people in the book. Mm-hmm. Where he says that Mr. Emerson, he
killed his wife on the side of God.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the scientific developments are not gone into, but certainly the whole question of social class, and especially Cecil's attitude toward class is important. Beverly and Liz.
And when you're naming off the different types of characters, we've got Charlotte, who's sort of the poor relation spinster type that you have in lots of British novels. And, she's kowtows to Lucy, and she's older than Lucy. So much that my feelings are hurt you know, for her. When she says, oh, if there's a room, there's a room with a view, you must have it, you know, this must be for you. Well, you know, in my view, I know she's, I suppose, a paid companion, or at least her travel is paid for, but she's doing them a favor to accompany Lucy to Italy and to be a part of the family. So, you know, she's one of those characters who is probably of diminished, you know, fashion. And I think you see her type of character quite frequently in novels of this type.
Yeah, I think I take her immigration as not quite sincere, but there you are. Susan.
Yeah, I was gonna talk about the single women too. I mean, they're really in a class of their own, you know, and it's a weird class because they have the allegiance to that kind of upper middle gentry class that the honey churches and Mr. Beebe represent, but they are also kind of rootless. So they're always moving from place to place, even all the way to Constantinople, those, and maybe further around the world. And it's not because they have a desire to see something. It's just that they don't really have a home. There's not a place for them in this society. And there are a lot of them. And although Forster couldn't know this, there are going to be more of them once World War I happens and so many young men, you know, get killed. So there's, I mean, I thought it was really fascinating that those, I mean, that's another class issue that he's looking at, these people who don't fit in one way or another. And some of it has to do with gender, and some of it has to do with getting married and settling down to be, you know, on you know, one of the available houses in this little road that they live on.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Liz, did you have something?
Yeah, I just think it's really clear that he's, I mean, you can make an argument that he's foregrounding class because it's so important in the very first vignette we see. So when we're first introduced to these characters in Italy, they're presented as a group that's a little bit haphazard. They've been thrown together in this pension, right? But as a group, they decide that the Emersons will not do. And Eager's really explicit condemnation of them seems to fit that. And, you know, I would argue against the honey churches representing this like landed gentry. They're not. They, you know, they're business people who got lucky and sort of, you know, bought their way into that lifestyle, but they're not. And I mean, I think it's clear that Cecil is marrying down in marrying Lucy. And, you know, it's okay with his family because she has these other gifts. And so I think, you know, when Lucy ends up with George, she's really sort of reclaiming the class that her family originated from. So I don't know whether that makes Forster conservative or progressive, because, you know, he seems to be condemning the kind of class prejudice that you see in Mr. Eager. You know, Mr. Eager is like an irredeemed character in this book for sure, right? Like maybe the most irredeemed in the book. But he also seems to suggest that like Lucy's happiness is going to come when she walks away from that class that her family aspired to and finds her way to happiness with George, who works for the railroad, right?
You know, and Cecil, of course, looks down upon the honey churches. He doesn't like
Right.
Mrs. Church. He doesn't like Freddie. This is not the proper behavior for his social class. Yeah.
Right.
Pearl and Harriet and Susan and Joellen. Okay. Go, Pearl.
Just want to add the another little layer of a social class, and that is the class of scribbling women of Miss Lavish and her novel. And that also makes me think about the first time or the only time we see her making any life of her own, any interest for herself, is in befriending Miss Lavish, and look how wrong that seems to go. So, so scribbling women.
Yep. Harriet, Susan, and Joe Ellen.
I've been thinking about the way in which a lot of the humor of the novel is directed in jokes about class. That there's, the jokes about Cockney accent, and there's jokes about George works for the railroad. He's the perfect porter. And interestingly, that comes from Miss Lavish, who, you think might be in a different position. But the jokes are all turned back on the characters that say them. So I'm thinking about Cecil when he says, Lucy, he's educating her. He says, Lucy, the classes ought to mix, and before long you'll agree with me. There ought to be intermarriage, all sorts of things. I believe in democracy. And she, snaps back, no, you don't. And we certainly know that she doesn't. He doesn't. But that loop of jokes that are introduced, directed against class, even by folks who are in a class ambiguous position. I very much agree that Lucy's family is passing, and it is that's where we are with her family, and they have the opportunity to make a good match with Cecil if it should go that way. But I don't think Mrs. Honeychurch could bear it, can bear his condescension.
Right. Susan and Joe Ellen. Oh, Susan, we can't hear you.
I was just going to say, I wasn't going to say anything, but I think of the class issue coming up with Cecil and Mrs. Honeychurch being uncomfortable with them. And at the first, in that chapter, I've got different page numbers, but medieval, when she doesn't want Mrs. Weiss to think her old-fashioned, because she goes in for lectures and improving the mind, sort of John's point about how things are changing in the upper classes, doing more things, whereas they're still normal working people. And then at the end, when we don't like Cecil and we're glad that Miss Honeychurch doesn't like him, she says, no doubt I'm neither artistic or literary or intellectual or musical, but I can't help the dining room furniture. So the class issue kind of goes into her relationship with Cecil, and I really like Mrs. Honeychurch. Yeah. And I think they'll get back together. I mean, she's just like a lot of relatives that doesn't like somebody you married too bad, So
yeah, your father bought this furniture. We're keeping it. Yeah. Okay. Joe Ellen.
I want to draw our attention back to the third chapter in the book, Music, Violets, and the Letter S. And I went back and looked at that because I couldn't remember what S was for. And I thought, sex? Surely not. But remember that Mr. Emerson has warned Miss Pohl about her stomach, which is the word that cannot be used. And on page 34 in the middle, we're told that, was it even Miss Lavish? Anyway, all on account of S being mentioned in the first place. We're in this muddle. And we go on to bottom of that page, and who asks Mr. Beebe? Lucy, I think, whether old Mr. Emerson is nice. Is he nice or not nice? I do so want to know. And he really has fun with this. At the top of the next page, he says, I consider that you are bound to class him as nice, Miss Ellen, after that business of the violets. So class, what's nice, and I think the violets are mentioned for the first time here, which are they're planted. We don't really know at this point what the business of the violets is, but we're certainly aware that in the next chapter, the fourth chapter by the end, Lucy lands in a bed of violets. Anyway, I think there's just a lot of really good stuff in this chapter.
Thank you. Yeah. Good.
And a classification there.
Yeah. And how dare you use the word stomach, a polite company. Yeah. Pearl.
I think we have to look up or have someone check out what is the meaning or the connotation of violets. We haven't necessarily done that yet, but Joellen taking us to the chapter medieval lands me on this page where Mr. Beebe says, "Let me see, Mr. Weiss, I forget, what is your profession?" "Oh, I have no profession," said Cecil. "It's another example of my decadence, my attitude, quite an indefensible one, is that so long as I am no trouble to anyone, I have a right to do as I like. I know I ought to be getting money out of people or devoting myself to things I don't care a straw about, but somehow I'm not able to begin." "Oh, you're very fortunate," said Mr. Beebe. "It is a wonderful opportunity, the possession of leisure." And then a few minutes later, "I'm so glad that you approve. I daren't face the healthy person. For example, Freddie Honeychurch." So healthy as maybe a synonym for a working class, you know, someone who isn't as decadent and leisurely as Cecil.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
It
just
doesn't play tennis. No, it's not involved in anything physical. Yeah. Joellen, did you have something else?
I just, while Pearl was speaking, looked up violets, and there has
Okay.
to be joking going along there too. It says violets signify modesty and humility. And when given in bunches, they're given to newlyweds. It goes on. You know, violets are symbolic of faith, mystical awareness, inspiration, spiritual, I mean, most anything. But I really think when aimed at the Mrs. Pole, that they aren't quite even what Mr. Emerson would have thought, but it's a joke that we can get.
Yeah. What shall we talk about religion and in the novel, and about the two clerics we have here, Mr. Eager and Mr. Beebe? Anyone interested in Mr. Eager and Mr. Beebe?
I think that Mr. Eager is the one who really plants the vicious seed that Mr. Emerson is a murderer.
Yes,
And there's a really circuitous route for us to get back to that. That does, if you remember it, plant a seed of mystery in the novel. And it's, anyway, I'm not going to go on and go on toward the end toward that, but it is very important.
So there is this, Martha.
Hi, I have this question, and it's along religion, but not about the ministers. In that scene, I think it was in the church where Forster refers to, and I don't know which character was speaking, but the little children as papists, little papists running around. And what struck me, my question is, what does that say about the attitudes of towards the Catholics at that time?
Somebody who knows more about Edwardian society, but in general, in England, Catholicism was looked down upon, and Italians too, as sort of emblems of the fallen world, I think. So that there would be calling them little papists, and I'm sure that Forster is objecting to that himself with that sort of attitude. Harriet?
I want to say Mr. Eager is one representative of Christianity, and Mr. Beebe is another. And in spite of the maliciousness of Eager, both in his interaction with Mrs. Emerson and with us as an audience, it's Mr. Beebe who hurts me more as we, I think from the beginning I was asking whether we could trust him, and we trust him on so much. We trust him on Lucy's music. We trust him in his dislike of Cecil, but we've also had these moments like when he thinks that Italians are superficial, most unpleasant people. We're at their mercy. They read our thoughts, they foretell our desires, and I resent it. That there is the puritanical streak that comes out in at the end of the novel when he's no longer interested in Lucy and George. If they're going to go that way, if Lucy is not good, we're not going to have Saint Lucy. I mean, I think that for Beebe and for the novel, there are two kinds of holiness, and one is in the church and is dangerous. Because the other holiness is the holiness of desire, the holiness of the body, the sacred lake, and so it's an interesting and perhaps unexpected antagonism in its degree, I think, to the church.
Yeah, I was really shocked when Mr. Beebe wanted to impose his own belief in celibacy upon Lucy.
Yeah.
And then when she does not embrace the belief he's imposed upon her, he dismisses her. And so, yeah, the man you think is the sort of enlightened cleric turns out to be, in his own way, as detestable as Mr. Eager. And so these two visions of the English church, the Anglican church, are set against Mr. Emerson and his everlasting yea, and Mr. Emerson comes out ahead, I'd say.
I just wanted to add that I think that the discussions about music are really interesting because I do think that from the beginning, music is set up as something physical. I was looking back at the first passage where Lucy is intoxicated by the mere feel of the notes, by touch, not by sound alone. And that music is presented as something that maybe Mr. Beebe isn't actually as attuned to as Lucy.
A nice metaphor there, attuned. Yeah. Bill, and then Pearl.
Yeah, I know we're almost at the end here. It seems like there were four religious views presented, not just two. We talked about the two English ministers, but then there's the view of the Catholic Church inside the church where there's beauty, and she's not sure how to tell what is beautiful inside that Catholic Church. And then there's the native folk wisdom that's almost mystical of the Italians. And Mr. Beebe, with his rejection of religion and his ability to see inside Lucy's soul that she did know that she was in love with his son right from the beginning. He was able to see that. He tried to persuade her to have a relationship with his son. So there's something about his irreligiousness that provided that same kind of folk wisdom that the Italian people had shown to in this. So I just saw four views.
Yeah, the embracing of the body rather than the denial of the body. Yeah, Pearl.
So we've expanded the idea of religion into spirituality, and I like those categories there. And I was going to remind us too, which Suzanne just mentioned a moment ago, about transcendentalism with Carlyle and Emerson and Thoreau, a different kind of way of relating to the world, to others, and to any sort of spiritual thing. And then last little question, could Mr. Beebe have some interests in Lucy? And that is why he rejects her marrying George. Maybe he has some feelings, even though he keeps denying anything about knowing about women or caring about women. And he's forced into this celibacy. And so when she's taken, he can't live out his fantasies. It's just possible reading.
There's an interesting idea, which I hadn't thought of. Yeah. Bill? Oh, no. Okay. All right. Well, I think we have 2 minutes left. Would anyone like to have the last word?
Thank you so much.
Take it, Suzanne.
I'm Pearl.
I want you to take the last word.
Oh, you want me to take the last? Well, I will take the last word and say that Eudora Welty called Forster the finest novelist of our time when she was writing about him in her review, and her meeting with Forster was one of the highlights of her time in England in 1954. And so I'm really glad that we have read together one of Forster's novels, and we can appreciate the reasons for her enthusiasm for Forster. I'm really grateful to Kelly Marsh for leading the discussion, and sorry she can't be with us today. And I'm really grateful to all of you. And you have the greatest tribute of all. Kelly Marsh says you've changed the way she's going to teach a room with a view forever after. So congratulations to our wonderful book club and to Kelly. And I'm glad that we now have number E.M. Forster among those that we have studied in conjunction with Eudora Welty. Now, Harriet, and we'll give you the last word.
So the last word, I just was remembering that in the letter that he writes to her, complimenting her, he talks about his attraction to the wide net. And wow, I really see that. I really see how he would love the wide net. I think Ladies in Spring, I think that's an interesting moment of connection over his reading that book.
Oh, maybe we're going to have to discuss this sometime too. Yeah.
What's next?
Eudora Welty. And I hope we'll read more Forster in the future. All right.
All right. Should I close this out, Suzanne?
Close this out.
All right. Thank you so much to everyone for being a part of our discussion. Thanks again to Suzanne Mars, to Kelly Marsh, to NDAH, and to the Eudora Welty Foundation. A tradition by now is that we like to share our next book club picks at the end of every session. So as you guys know, Welty at Home alternates between books by Welty with books connected to Welty. So our next books will be by Welty, and they will be The Robber Bridegroom and The Ponder Heart together in the next session.
Good. Oh, yay.
Yay. So exciting.
Oh, good.
We will be referencing the Library of America edition of the Eudora Welty's complete novels, but any text will do. If you have signed up to receive the Welty at Home emails, you will automatically receive updates for the next series. A reading schedule and dates will be announced in the coming weeks, and you can also follow our social media at Eudora Welty House on Facebook and Instagram, or visit eudoraweltyhouse.com for more Welty at Home book club updates. Thank you again, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.